All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, providing continuing coverage of the MLB Lockout. We are on day 84 of the lockout. The players are meeting with the owners every day in Florida, trying to get a deal done. Joining me on the phone today to break it all down, our legal correspondent and our main lockout guy, Phil Fraietta, is here. Phil, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
Very good. And the reason we're not doing this on video, because we usually do, is that you're actually down in Florida right now. Did we give you enough airfare to cover the negotiations for us?
Yeah, I am down in Florida. Unfortunately, I am nowhere near Jupiter.
Yeah.
I'm down on the west coast of Florida, but yes, I'm down here for a family vacation. Nothing, but I've been following from down here.
Yeah, so let's also get the audience up to date here. We did the big breakdown in December of what could happen here with the negotiations. Talked a little bit about it. We talked about the Flores lawsuit a few weeks ago, but let's catch everybody up here. So how has this been going? And what's sort of our timetable here? What's been going on?
It hasn't been going as well as I had hoped it would, or predicted for that matter. There was very little movement on either side until a couple of days ago. There was a few, I guess that was about 2 weeks ago now, the owners invited the players to participate in mediation with a mediator. The players saw through that as a sham and turned it down. The Department of Labor Secretary for the Biden administration offered to help. I don't think anybody took him up on that, but it seems like this week they've actually sat down and started to make some progress towards at least narrowing these gaps. But there are, as we're going to talk about in this section, there's some pretty substantial gaps to close and not a whole lot of time to do them.
Yeah, I mean, we will point out here, they initiated the lockout on December 2nd after the old CBA expired. The owners then did not pick up the phone for another 43 days. So I thought Rob Manfred said about how this is designed to protect the regular season and it's basically expedite negotiations. And now we've had basically, for a while, we was going, okay, here's a proposal. We're going to sit for 5 days. Then we'll talk again for about 20 minutes and we'll leave. Now we are in the last week of February. They're meeting for several hours every day, which the question obviously is why weren't we doing this hours ago? Why were we doing this weeks ago, back before spring training was delayed? But it's better late than never. But the question is, do they have enough time? And we're going to get to that today. Do they have enough time to solve these issues? Because I don't know if there's enough motivation on both sides, particularly on one more than the other, to actually try and not miss games.
Right. So if your listeners remember, I predicted that we wouldn't get much leverage on either side until after the Super Bowl. And part of that is simply the public pressure. Nobody's really tuned into this when football's going on. So I expected that after the Super Bowl, things would pick up. I did not expect, though, that they would be this far apart by the time things started to pick up, or that they would waste so much time between the Super Bowl and when things really did start to pick up. I know it doesn't seem like a lot of time, but the Super Bowl was 10 days ago now. So really all of last week was kind of wasted. And that would have been a critical week to try and narrow some of this gap, but it wasn't. So here we are. And we'll go through these points point by point, but there's a lot of ground to cover, and I don't know if they're going to be able to cover it all.
Yeah, we're going to start from the top and go down the issues here that we've mentioned here, from I think sort of the ones that are the least separation to the most separation. I think we'll start at the top here with free agency. And here's what we know right now, that initially the players were asking for age-related free agency. We're talking about back in December. It's everybody who's hits age 30 is a free agent, regardless of service time. The players have backed off of that. The owners basically maintain their status quo, but they have agreed to eliminate the draft pick penalties for signing a qualifying offer free agent. So that means if you were going forward here and the Mets offered Michael LaFleur the QO, a new team under the new CBA would not have to give up a draft pick to sign him. I think that's a positive, but that's one of the few things that they haven't made any sort of progress on here.
That's a positive and it's progress. However, it is tied a little bit to the league's position on the luxury tax, which we'll get to later. So this is not something that they're conceding. It's something they're offering in exchange for getting what they want on the luxury tax. So it's not a total win yet, but yeah, there does appear to be at least a avenue to agree to get rid of draft pick compensation with free agents.
Yeah, this is also one of those I feel like the players have a lot of ads, but this is not one that they were high on. So, okay, we'll let this one go for bigger gains.
Yep, exactly.
All right, next up here, going to the expanded playoffs here, and Craig Carton from WFAN, and he's tight with Rob Manfred, basically tweeted out today, the proposal is done. The owner's getting their 14 teams, 7 per league in the playoffs. The top seed in the league gets to the division series. We have the TV special where the winners pick their opponents otherwise. The players are countering. They want 12 teams, 6 per league. So since we're getting expanded playoffs, we're still just debating how many teams are going to be in that expanded postseason.
Yeah, and much like I thought the league was going to fold on the free agency issue. This is something that I think the players are going to fold on if and when we reach a deal. We've talked about on this podcast in the past a lot about why additional playoff teams is actually a negative for players. And it may seem a bit counterintuitive at first because you assume players want to be in the playoffs and have a chance to win, and that's true. But too many playoff teams waters down the regular season and allows for owners to essentially be cheap and not go for it all because they can sell their fan base on a playoff race or pennant chase, for, if you will, for the 7 seed. Which, I mean, if you're a basketball fan or a hockey fan, you know, what does that really matter? But in a sport like baseball, it could matter. It's certainly conceivable that take your team, Mike. Would I want to play the Mets in the playoffs with DeGrom and Scherzer, even if they were a 7th seed? No way. So that's why the union is pushing for less teams. But I think that this is ultimately one where they're going to end up caving because more playoff teams does mean more money for everybody, and it keeps the fans engaged in the season longer. And it's not the difference between 6 and 7 in a league is not huge from a player perspective.
Yeah, the difference is in terms of the money it brings in, that this is money that primarily benefits the owners because they have the new TV contracts at ESPN we need to break in, like $100 million for the expanded divisional series, and they get the vast majority of that. The players' playoff money basically comes from the gates on the playoff games, whereas the owners get paid on that. The players get paid in the regular season, which is why the owners care more about the postseason.
Yeah, that's true, but I don't think it's quite that simple because more interest in the league means more money to the players ultimately. But that said, they're not going to give in on this unless they get some of the more important points, which we're going to get to later in the segment.
Yeah. Next, we'll go to one that's basically agreed to, and Rob Manfred basically threw that out there as sort of an olive branch to the fans saying, look, we're making progress. The Universal DH is agreed to. It's coming to the baseball, the new CBA. So big takeaway here is that your age of pitchers hitting is over. The league is going to sell it as, 15 new high-paid jobs coming to the union, whereas you don't know for sure if that's going to be the case because there are teams that rotate the DH. I don't know how many National League teams are going to have a one tried and true, here's Nelson Cruz in the National League times 15. I don't think we're going to get that.
I'm not quite sure if we wouldn't get that or not. But this is something that I think everybody saw coming for years. It's time. The pitcher batting, we've talked about that on this podcast a lot. It's Major League Baseball was the National League in particular was the only professional league in the world where pitchers were still batting. It's an antiquated system. It was obvious that it was going to go. The owners held on to it for as long as they could to prevent those 15 or so jobs from getting paid. But I think they realized at this point that there's just no way to hold off on it anymore. It might not even be worth it because with the amount of money that these pitchers make, you don't want them going up there swinging a bat. Yeah,
absolutely not. That one was probably one of the easier ones to solve. Now we get to some of the thornier things.
But yeah. On the DH, I just will add, I could certainly see, though, I mean, I could see a National League team jumping in on a guy like Nelson Cruz or from a Yankee perspective, a universal DH certainly makes a guy like Luke Voigt significantly more valuable player. You can trade him to the National League and he can DH. So I wouldn't be surprised if a few National League teams have a full-time DH type guy.
Yeah, I didn't say it's going to be I didn't say it's more, like nobody's going to do it. It says a few. It's not going to be all 15 are going to have a full-time DH.
Yeah, but I agree with that. I mean, then all you got to do is look at the American League. How many teams in the American League have a true DH?
Yeah,
the Yankees.
Not a lot.
The Astros, not many.
Yeah. Now go to some of the thornier issues here, which is we'll go to the draft first. At this point, a draft, obviously, this is one of the big things that ties into the tanking concerns about the teams like the Orioles and the Pirates just racing to the bottom and not really trying to field a competitive Major League roster. The draft lottery has been proposed by both sides starting in 2023. The owners want 4 teams in it where you can't pick in the top 3 2 years in a row. Players start at 18 down to 7. They have restrictions built in how often teams can post the worst record in the league and be eligible for the lottery. Players also want to provide bonus draft picks as small market teams make the playoffs or post a winning season. So this is not one of those competitive balance issues where they're trying to incentivize like small market teams to actually try and spend money on players. And this is one where the owners are trying to limit how many teams are in this lottery because they say, hey, like if you're bad, you got to find a way to help you get better. And they're going to hide behind that, I think.
Yeah. Although I don't think we're too far off here. 4 teams versus 7 teams. You could see a compromise at a 5 or 6 number. I don't think the players are going to get the bonus draft picks, the small market teams that make the playoffs or post a winning season. I don't see that happening. But we're not too far off, and a lottery makes a lot of sense. What we've seen go on in baseball the last couple of years, you need to do something to disincentivize tanking, and it's a little strange to me because the baseball draft is such a crapshoot that I don't know. Does it really matter if you get the first pick? It's not like the NFL where you're trying to tank for the quarterback or something like that. But anything that could punish a team for intentionally losing, I think makes sense from a player's perspective. And I think the owners ultimately, they're proposing something here that they realize that fans are starting to understand that this is a sham in some respects. Some of these teams just are not trying.
Yeah, I think also the thing with the way the draft is set right now is not even just getting the top picks. The fact you get the biggest bonus pool with the slot money because they give you like the certain slots that you get the amount of signing bonus money, and you could manipulate that to get better players on lower in the draft. That's sort of the theory behind like why you're going for those picks as high as you want.
Yeah, but the bottom line and the simple truth here is the fans are seeing what's going on. There are teams in Major League Baseball that are just not even trying, and you can't have that. You can't have teams that are intentionally trying to lose.
Yeah, or teams will go entire offseasons without signing like a single like big league player to their roster as a free agent. Right.
So if this rule, whatever the ultimate agreement is, can help disincentivize that even just a little bit, it's something that it makes like a lot of sense, and it seems like there's a path to agreement there because the owners are putting something on the table that isn't too far off from what the players are asking for.
All right, now we're on to the 3 thorny issues here, all involving the money here. Arbitration up first. The owners have said it's a non-starter to change the arbitration eligibility, which right now is basically 3 years. After 3 years, you get arbitration eligible for 3 years before you hit free agency. 22% of players hit Super 2 status where they can get arbitration for 4 years. They did agree to a bonus pool to pay up to 30 overachieving young players $15 million. The players want Super 2 eligibility to go up to 75% of players being eligible for that Super 2 year. And that bonus pool, which again goes to players who are basically overachieve as youngsters. I think like Chris Bryant win the MVP in his second year. That pool is being funded by $115 million, which I know last week was like a confuffle. Maybe all the players went up on how much money they want, but if you actually do the math and divide the percentage, it basically ends up the money rate basically allows for more players that will access that money.
Right. So this is, like you said, this is, in my opinion, the second most thorny issue. The first is the luxury tax, which we'll get to. But they're really far apart on this. Really, really far apart. And well, I don't think we've mentioned it yet in the segment, but there is a supposed February 28th deadline put in place by the league that if we don't have a deal by the 28th, games will be canceled. They're very, very far apart on this term. And this is a lot of money that you're talking about. Adding Super 2 eligibility to 75% of players as opposed to the 25% or so that get it now is a tremendous amount of money. Because you're essentially adding, like you said, a fourth year of arbitration for 75% of the guys. That's big money that the owners would have to pay.
Yeah,
I don't know how this one point gets resolved. They're very far apart.
Yeah, this is one where the owners basically says a non-starter because then they're saying competitive integrity, small market teams can't afford to keep players, and then you have this sort of conspiracy theory flowing around saying, hey, if this does go in here, then a lot of guys who are Super 2 eligible get non-tender and the market will be flooded with free agents.
Yeah, that's going to be the league's response, and there's probably some truth to that. My stance as a pro player guy, I think that ultimately they can eat these costs. They make enough money, but there's certainly some truth to that. So when you look at this arbitration point, I think people look at the bonus pool and say, "Oh, that's the big difference." The bonus pool is a small fraction of it. You're talking about increasing arbitration eligibility for 75% of the players, and those are albeit small individual awards, but if you start adding them up into an aggregate number, it's a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
So they're far away here.
You're looking at basically a couple million per team, basically looking at every year.
Yeah, exactly. They're far away on this term, and I don't know how to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I don't know how to either. The next one here, the minimum salary, that's once again getting attention the last few days, where they've been wiggle room on this number a little bit. I mean, in comparison right now, under the last CBA, the MLB minimum salary is $570,500. Here's what is in the other leagues. The NFL, $660,000. The NBA, $925,258. NHL, $750,000. So even though the players of MLB play the most games, they have the lowest minimum wage. So that is something that they are definitely trying to fight for right now.
Yep. And the numbers that we got in the last back and forth put them far apart, but not as far as they are on the arbitration. I've got the owners proposing a $640,000 minimum that would go up $10,000 every year until you hit $680,000. The players, on the other hand, want $775,000 with an increase to $805,000, $835,000, $855,000, and $895,000. Again, kind of like the draft lottery, you could see a middle position here where you can meet at something close to the midpoint and call it a day. I think that both sides have arguments. You mentioned the players' argument that, hey, wait a minute, we play more games than everybody else and we get paid less. I think the owner argument on the flip side is, yeah, but there's more jobs in Major League Baseball than there are in the NHL and the NBA. So that's more people we got to pay. And then when it comes to the NFL, yeah, there might be more NFL jobs, but the average NFL career is shorter, so your lifetime earnings are still substantially higher than as a baseball player. So I think both sides have some arguments there, and I don't think they're too far apart there that they shouldn't be able to work out something where they meet close to the middle.
Yeah, I would suspect that as well. I've also mentioned here that there was a previous proposal from the owners where they had raises they had basically a flat cap of like $630,000 as their minimum, but you couldn't offer a raise over. This way, there is now a system where there's raises increasing, but they didn't lock you out from offering more than the minimum to a player if you want to reward them for good performance. Think like the Mets giving Pete Alonso more than the minimum after he led the league in homers his rookie year, something like that.
Yeah, that's helpful too. Again, if you just take out the calculator and do the math, they're not that far apart on this number. You should be able to bridge that.
Yeah, and this one now, this is the big one. They have not even touched this yet. I'll get to what Jeff has to say about it in a moment here, the luxury tax. And obviously, we've been talking about it for years about how a lot of teams just treating it as basically a de facto salary cap. They don't want to go over it. The penalties for exceeding it are not that crazy. Right now, the owner proposals that the first threshold $214 million for 2 years, 216, 218, 222. Then the second threshold, 234 for 3 years, 236 to 240, the last two. The biggest threshold, 254 for 3 years, and 256 and 260. Penalties here are astronomical. 50% per dollar for beating the first threshold, 75%, and a second round pick being lost for exceeding the second threshold. 100% is a dollar per dollar over the tax, and a first round pick lost for exceeding the third threshold. Players back over here proposing $245 million, $252 million, $259, $266, $273 over the lifetime deals, the first threshold. Second threshold is $20 million over each of those figures. Third, $40 million over each of those. Penalties for exceeding those would maintain the same financial penalties in the current deal. It's about 20, 30, 50, and drop the draft pick penalties. And this one, they have not touched this one. There's been very little movement on this one. And this is nobody wants to blink on this one because this is where the biggest money difference is.
Right. And let's break it down again. Starting from something that I've mentioned on this podcast a lot, and I'm trying to beat it into the listener's head. When you're talking about salary caps and luxury taxes, owners want them, players don't. I know that, again, that sounds a little counterintuitive because you think that players want competitive balance and parity. They don't. They don't want people capping their salaries. They want to be able to make as much money as they think that they are worth, which, if you think about it outside of a baseball or sports context, makes a whole lot of sense. If you were an accountant, you wouldn't want there to be a salary cap for accountants. So that's what's going on there. The owners want it because the cap allows them to spend less money overall. They're limited in the amount that they can spend. So starting with that basic understanding, if you look at the two proposals here, you see how far apart they are. So there's two aspects of the proposal. The first is what's the cap going to be? And you went through those numbers, and they're far apart, but believe it or not, they're actually closer than the second part, which is what is the penalty for exceeding the tax. The way that the owners have structured it, with those penalties, they are so substantial that it essentially turns the luxury tax into a salary cap. To go over it would be just crazy at those kinds of penalties. The players, on the other hand, have penalties that are more reasonable, such that teams might see it in their self-interest to go over it. Somebody like, for instance, the Dodgers, I know have gone over often. You mentioned how other teams treat it like a salary cap. The Yankees are a prime example of that. They've treated it like a salary cap for the past 2 years. So that you have to work on those two aspects of it. What's the tax going to be, and what are the penalties for going over it? And they're mountains apart on both points.
Yeah, I'm gonna also throw out here some other things here. It's like even with let's use the Mets example, where Steve Cohen spent a stupid money so far of his winter getting a bunch of guys on the team before the deadline imposed. I think their current payroll is about $253 million, roughly. That's before they do other things. If Steve Cohen's paying 100% per dollar if he exceeds that third threshold, even he's gonna have to say, "Whoa, I can't do that."
Yeah. Now he's somebody who, in the past, has said if you're going to go over the tax, you should blow over it. But he was saying that under the old penalty structure. Under a new penalty structure where he's paying dollar for dollar above the tax, there's no way he's going to do that. Even Cohen's not going to do it. So what the owners are proposing here is essentially a salary cap. It's as close to a salary cap as you're going to ever get in baseball. For the listeners who don't know, that is why the 1994 strike happened. The owners tried to impose a salary cap. The players went on strike. They avoided getting a salary cap. That's why baseball is the only major sport that doesn't have a salary cap. But this luxury tax came into play, and it is essentially serving as a salary cap now. And the owners are proposing something that is, they may as well just call it a salary cap for the reasons you just said.
Yeah, and as far as that's concerned, like the way these penalties are, there's no way that will be the final threshold here. And there's also another component to this, which is the players, I didn't mention on the rundown here, but they want to sort of cease revenue sharing because they feel like, again, teams are pocketing this money and not putting it into their products. And the small markets is saying we need this to sustain our operations. I feel like one potential option, I forget who said it on Twitter, made sense here, is basically suggested that the these endpoint here sort of is going to end up being somewhere in the 220s for the initial threshold. The penalties will be down to just match what we have last year. The players give out the revenue sharing complaint and let the owners still have revenue sharing. Like that's going to be sort of where we get there. But the question is how long it takes us to reach that point.
Yeah, that would be a reasonable compromise. But that leads us into the segment. How long does it take to get there? Because there's this 228 deadline that's looming now. We're sitting here recording this on 223, and at night on 223. So this day's shot too. You've got essentially 4 days to work this out.
You got 5, including the actual day itself.
Yeah, including the actual day itself, right?
Yeah, and I will mention before we get to the actual deadline situation here that there are no on-field changes coming to negotiations. So if you're looking at the pitch clock, the shift, pace of play, none of that's involved here. This is all basically money.
Yeah, I think that we're too late in the game to get any of that stuff. It's a shame because I think some of it would be pretty helpful. I'm a proponent of doing something about the shift. I think the shift has hurt the game, but you're not going to get that in the CBA negotiation. It doesn't mean you don't get it afterwards if they can agree. Because if you can agree on the money, you could start the season, and you could always make a rule change like that. Really at any time and say, okay, it's going to be effective to start the 23 season. But it's not going to happen for the start of the 23 season.
Yeah, and right now we mentioned here the big development today was that we'd heard that there was a deadline of the 28th, and I was speculating at the top of the podcast saying, hey, if we're close on the 28th and they agree a deal on March 1st, that, they're going to, they would do the wiggle room here and just get the thing done. But right now the owners are trying to basically say, hey, if there is no deal on the 28th, games will be canceled. Players will not get paid for those games. So right now they are basically trying to leverage the players again and say, hey, make a deal or you're going to start losing money. Whereas we're going to be in it for the longer run, but you're not. So I feel like right now we have a clear pressure point here of this deadline. If we do not get a deal done by 11:59 on February 28th, that you're going to start canceling regular season games.
Yeah. That's so. What I guess the question is, what do I think the wiggle room is? There's always every deadline has some wiggle room, but I don't think it's a lot. Maybe it's a couple of days, 2, 3, 4 days. Just look at the calendar. It's not possible now. Obviously, you could squeeze in games, double headers, and things like that. But you're running out of days, and there's benefits in deadlines. Deadlines typically help people get things done. So I get the sense of setting the deadline. And like you said, the players don't get paid during if games are canceled. So that is a economic incentive for them to work something out. But I think there's a couple of 2, 3, 4 days wiggle room. Otherwise, we're going to be in jeopardy of losing games.
Yeah, I'll also point out here, I do agree that there is some wiggle room here, but as what the owners say, I think there actually has to be progress being made at that point. If we're still doing these 5-inch movements every day, when we get to 28th, we're still miles apart. They're going to say, if we don't have a deal at the end of the day, we're just going to not start canceling games.
Absolutely. Yeah, that there's got to be significant progress between now and then for that deadline to not be a real deadline.
Yeah, and the question here, I think, is got to be definitely raised, considering how little movement we really had over the last 3 days of them actually meeting every day. If we get past the 28th, there's no deal, and it's not a deal that appears to be close. How much longer do you think this thing could drag out? Because, I feel like if you blow past the deadline, I feel like it's going to be a period where they just go retreat to their corners again and don't talk to each other for a couple of weeks.
So I've thought about it in a couple of different ways. One school of thought would be, well, I guess both sides could say to themselves, all right, what is a realistic length for a regular season that isn't going to be viewed as a joke? For instance, if you told me that there was going to be 154 games instead of 162, I think everybody would be disappointed, but wouldn't really be much of a joke. That was how baseball used to be played, so okay, you can understand that. But once you start getting below that number, once you start getting into the 140s or the 130s, then it's really starting to look a little bit more like a joke. So I think that would be the first threshold where they would say, all right, let's try and get something done so that we can get a 154 in. If you pass the 154, though, where at the point where you can get a 154 game season in, then I think all bets are off. I think you're just in potential standstill until somebody makes something happen. It's hard to predict now, though. I think I'll have a better sense of it in 3, 4, 5 days when we see how much closer they can get. But if they go to the 28th and blow past that deadline, they're far apart. I don't know how much longer it could be. It could be weeks, even a month.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of key factors you have to watch here if they go past this deadline. Just number one, like, how long can the players stay united with the fact that they're only getting basically $5,000 checks to the union, which is not going to be enough to basically pay your rent, let alone support your family. So that's question number one. And question number two, in terms of the owners, like, they have kind of hinted in the past, like, like, we are willing to miss games. And you and I know, basically being here in New York, that, like, the weather is bad in April, that they're not going to get a lot of turnout for some of these Tuesday night games in April. But, like, the pressure is that, like, if you do not deliver a certain number of games to the regional sports networks, like your SNYs and your Yeses, they have to get refunded money here. So the owners will eventually start to bleed money too. So the question is, how long they have to have a number in mind of, like, how many games they're willing to sacrifice before they start to bend even more.
Yep. So that's what I said was the first school of thought, and I'd add to that because some listeners might be saying, "Oh, come on, Mike, what are you talking about? Not being able to pay their rent? These guys are super rich." But take a step back, and when you're dealing with a union, part of the issue that you get is the drastic difference between some of the members. So what I mean by that is, let's take a look at the Yankees. Garrett Cole, yeah, he's fine. You pay him $5,000 a month, he's fine. Guy has made millions of dollars. He gets tremendous signing bonuses, fine. But let's take a look at somebody else on the Yankee team. Go down the roster to a guy like I think Tyler Wade's actually not actually on the roster right now, but let's use him as an example. That's meaningful to a Tyler Wade. He hasn't made that kind of money in his life. So that's where you start getting splits between the top earning guys in the union and some of the more rank and file. So from a union perspective, it's hard. And on the owner side, you kind of have that issue. It's a little different, but you have it. That's when a Hal Steinbrenner says, "Hey, wait a minute. My team makes a lot of money at the gate and on the Yes Network. Now I'm losing that money. Maybe the guy who owns the Rays doesn't care as much. He's not making any money at the gate anyway. But so you start getting some dissent in the owner's room also. So I think that is a good point. And I view that as the first school of thought, and I think it's the correct school. The second school of thought, though, is they blow past the deadline and they say, "All right, let's dig our heels in. This is we're at war, and we're going to get the very best deal we can, and we don't care what that does to the 2022 season." And that's I don't think that's going to happen, but it's an outcome that any fan should certainly be scared of.
It's one you can see too, considering that the relationship between these two sides is terrible.
Yeah, and there's precedent here. Remember that there's different faces in there, but this is a league and a union that canceled the World Series. They canceled the World Series in '94. So there's precedent here for these guys to say, we don't care what happens to this season. They look at what they did with the COVID. They had an opportunity to play a nice 100-some-odd game season despite the pandemic and be the only thing on TV, and they couldn't figure it out. They played 60 games. So there's animosity there. So I don't think it's out of the question that these guys dig their heels in and go to war with each other.
Yeah, I certainly don't either. I'll throw out one other thing before we get to our prediction when opening day actually happens here is I'm going to mention on the record here that I think the owners have done a decent job so far over the last few weeks of basically trying to, like, whether it's through their help with certain writers for certain outlets basically carrying the water, saying, like, hey, like, Max Scherzer's driving a Porsche up to negotiations today and stuff, and Jim or certain athletic writers who used to work for the league saying, the players have to bend a little bit. We have to remind everybody, the owner's the one who initiated the lockout here. The owner, Rob Manfred, came out here and said this is designed to protect the regular season. If we go past 28th and the league that locked the players out is canceling games because they don't have a CBA, that looks very bad on Rob Manfred and the owners.
It should. It should. There's always, like you said, there's always that. I can't really describe it. It's a weird phenomenon. But when you have billionaires versus millionaires, sometimes the public sides with the billionaires over the millionaires. It's strange when you say it that way, but I think you're right. It's that these people, their faces are more recognizable to the fans. Fans recognize a Scherzer. They recognize a Garrett Cole. They don't recognize whoever the hell owns the Rays. I don't even know the guy's name. And I'm a big baseball fan. So part of that is that they're able to hide behind that. But I do think you're right that the fans are smart enough, if you get to a point where there's no games, to say, hey, wait a minute, you locked them out. So it's not going to look good for the owners.
Especially when
and really, I just don't think the league is in a position to take this, Mike. I think that the sport needs to get this resolved, to get back to normalcy. This is a sport that has not been normal for 2 years now. People forget that. But the 2020 season was just totally shot with COVID. I mean, they did with the best. They didn't do the best they could because they couldn't even reach a deal. But they gave us something. And then last year it wasn't exactly a normal season. If you remember, it was nice that we got a full season in, and for most of the year, fans were at games and so on. But you had periods of time where, like, entire teams were on the COVID list. So I think normalcy is huge for this league now. They got to work this out. They've got to get spring training, and they've got to have a normal 162-game season.
Yeah, and you mentioned here, like, if you think about all the fun we had prior to the lockout when everybody was signing and there was a huge rush of this, like, imagine how much positivity baseball could have. They get the deal done, and all of a sudden you have spring training going on, a bunch of big free agents are signing, lots of trades are happening, and everyone's getting excited for baseball coming back. And now, if you go past the day nothing's happening, you lose a lot of that buzz you could have gained.
If you get the deal done such that spring training is going on in March, the average guy is not going to care about what happened the last 3 months. Because let's face it, the average guy doesn't care about February spring training. March, that's when people say, hey, it's time for baseball. So to me, the goal would be, I want spring training in March, and come April 1st or March 31st or whatever opening day is supposed to be this year, I want to play ball.
Yeah, I've said on this podcast several times, I'll say it again here, that, like, I think if you go to March 31st, opening day is supposed to be, and the average fan does not have met baseball, he's not in the stadium, he's not watching the Yankees in Texas, like, then you're having a major problem with the public because you're going to lose a lot of them.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a sport that's already in jeopardy. It's starting to, because people are sick of it. They just can't take it anymore. They're getting sick of the cheapness from the owners. They're getting let's try and be fair here. They're getting sick of the players. You know, these guys do make a lot of money, and they're acting as if they're treated like servants, and they're really not to some extent. So I get that people are sick of it, and they haven't really been able to see normalcy. Keep in mind too, Mike, the other thing that has kind of driven the fans a little, they're a little upset, is baseball, more so than any other sport, has a mentality that we know better than the fans. And it comes from the analytics departments that all these teams have, that, oh, no, everything that you know about baseball is wrong. We actually know how to play baseball. And fans have started to get a little upset about that. They got upset with it in the choices of managers. They get upset with it in the choices of players, signings. So you're already dealing with a fan base that's a little like, hey, this isn't really the game that I remember watching. And now you're kind of telling me that the game that I was watching for 30, 40 years is not actually the right way to play it. That's a tough sell. So you're doing that, and on top of that, now you're not giving me normal seasons anymore. This isn't even not. So not only is the sport not played the way I remember it, but when it is played, everything's abnormal as far as season, the length. I think it's a dangerous time for baseball.
Yeah, I'll throw two other things out here too. I mean, in terms of, like, I run a fantasy league. You were in it at one point. You dropped out a few years ago because it was not for you at that point. But Like people like me run the leagues. Like we're not even starting the leagues right now because we don't know when we're getting baseball. So like, why are we getting ready to draft when we don't know when half these guys are on teams?
Sure. Yeah, and by the way, if there's a spot open, I'll take it again. I regret dropping out, but yeah, that's part of it. Sure. And the second part of it, which we haven't even touched on, I know you were going to say something, but before I forget, gambling is now legal in a ton of states, way more states than it was the last time baseball was played. That's tremendous revenue. That's eyes on the TV. That's eyes in the stadium. I wouldn't want to miss out on that.
No, I wouldn't either. And I think in terms of now let's put some money on let's put our money on our mouth this year. Opening day's posted March 31st. When actually will baseball regular season begin?
This is a guess because who the hell knows? But my heart is telling me that we're going to play on March 31st. My head is telling me I'm not so sure. But I'm going to go with March 31st. I'm going to try and be optimistic here. There is, for all the reasons I just laid out, there is too much money at stake for these guys to not sit down over the next 5 days and hammer this out. Get it done. And let's go play baseball on March 31st so that we can have a normal season. The fans want it. I think the fans are craving baseball. The postseason ratings are pretty good for the most part. TV ratings are still pretty good. The ticket sales were coming up last year as the pandemic situation got better. I think people want baseball in their lives. So I'm going March 31.
I'm sort of in the same boat where it's like my heart, like I would like a common sense say like there's too much on the line here. They will find a way to get something done on the 28th and we'll have baseball on the 31st. But my head is also saying these are the same owners who locked them out, did not negotiate 43 days. Just yesterday, tried to get the mediator again, and the players again said no. The question I have with this is, do the owners care about losing games? Because if they do, they will lose games. Because if they don't mind it, we're going to be sitting here for a while. I think this is the owners here, particularly in the small markets, who would rather get a win over the union and keep salaries down than start baseball on time, and that worries me.
I think you're right. So the pessimistic part is I remember, yeah, there's owners like that, and these are the same guys. Mike, take yourself back. It's now February of 2022. Try and take yourself back to June of 2020. There was nothing on TV. Nothing was going on. These guys had the opportunity to be in the spotlight, and they couldn't get it done. So that scares me a lot because there's same guys in the room, same guys, bad track record. I'm still going March 31, but I wouldn't put too much confidence in that prediction.
Yeah, it's like you're putting like your confidence level is about like a 3. I would say we're starting on time.
3 or 4, yeah.
Yeah.
Ask me again though on Sunday, and hopefully on Sunday I'll have a clearer picture. But I don't trust these guys. My heart tells me that they're going to do it. My head tells me there's so much money at stake, but my head also tells me these guys have a track record of failing. Why should I trust them?
I said, I think about a week ago when I was talking to somebody about this on the podcast, about Joe D'Aloisio in the Super Bowl recap. At the end, we said, when is baseball starting? He said May 1. I said April 15. So I'm going to stick with that right now. I think we are going to lose some games here for somebody bends.
And yeah, I could see that. And I think April 15 is kind of the point where if there's no baseball on April 15, then people are saying, all right, now people are mad. I agree with you. I think the first 2 weeks of the season, the diehard fan, everybody loves opening day. And then the first couple of weeks of the season, the diehard fan likes it. But the average guy doesn't really care about the first 2 weeks of the season. It's not really baseball anyway. The starting pitcher goes 4 innings, and then they got to get him out of the game because he's on a pitch count. The batters are, the guys 1 for 10. So players haven't really started establishing themselves in their seasons yet. So yeah, I think you can get to April 15 without there being a huge revolt or outrage. May 1, though. If you get to May 1, I think you're going to have a big problem.
Yeah, I think even not having games on April 15th is a big problem because I don't know if you realize this is the 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson breaking the collar barrier, and that was the day, April 15th, when it happened. If you were not playing baseball on a day, that's a very terrible look for the league.
Yeah, no, I did not realize that, but that makes sense as I do the math in my head. Yeah, that's another bad PR thing that baseball can't deal with. I'm going with March 31, but if I had to make a second choice, April 15 would be my second choice.
Yeah, so we will see what happens, Phil. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Let's keep our eyes on this, and I'm really hoping that over the weekend we get the good news.